He stood at the altar in a $3,000 suit, surrounded by white roses, 120 guests, and an open bar that cost more than most people's cars. He was so sure he'd won. He always was. What he didn't know, what nobody in that church knew yet, was that I'd already burned the whole thing down. I was just there to watch it catch. If you're watching this video, tell me where you're from or what time it is for you. The door to the Carver Estate Library was one of those heavy mahogany ones with a brass handle worn smooth from 100 years of use. I remember the cold of that handle against my palm. I remember the exact weight of it. I remember thinking, as I pushed it open, that I was just looking for a quiet room to check my phone before the rehearsal dinner chaos swallowed me whole. I was not looking for what I found. Elliott's jacket was on the floor. His shirt was untucked, and his face had that particular gone somewhere else look that I recognized immediately, even though I'd never seen it on him before. Not like this. Not aimed at someone else. Vivian Cross had her back against the antique desk, her silk dress twisted sideways, her hand pressed flat on the leather surface like she needed to steady herself. Her dark hair had come loose from whatever careful arrangement she'd spent that afternoon constructing. For a moment, I am talking maybe 2 full seconds, nobody in that room processed what was happening. Then Elliott's eyes found mine and his face did something complicated. Not shame, not exactly. It was more like the split second a quarterback has when he sees the linebacker coming and knows it's too late to throw. Vivian just pulled her dress straight and looked at the window. Elliott started. I didn't let him get there, because behind me I heard it, a sound I will never forget as long as I live. It wasn't a gasp. It was softer than that. It was Jasper Briggs, my best friend of 11 years, civil rights attorney, the man who had stood by me through 2 years of brutal residency and one really terrible relationship before Elliott. Jasper made the smallest sound, barely any sound at all, like someone had taken the air out of his lungs 1 quiet inch at a time. He had been looking for Vivian, too. He'd wanted to show her something he'd written, a toast for the rehearsal dinner. He'd worked on it for 2 weeks. I knew because he'd texted me 3 different drafts asking which one was better. The 4 of us stood there in the library that smelled of old books and Vivian's expensive perfume. Something French. I'd always hated it. And nobody said anything for what felt like a very long time. Then Elliott said it. The sentence that would define everything that came after, the sentence he'd probably said before to other people in other rooms and gotten away with it because the other people let him. "Relax," he said. "It was just physical. You're overreacting like you always do. Stop being so dramatic about everything. Just physical, like that made it tidier, like slapping a label on it changed what it was." I looked at him for a long moment. I looked at his face, which was now arranging itself into something that passed for reasonable, something practiced and slightly impatient, the face of a man who genuinely believed that if he sounded calm enough, he could manage his way out of anything. Then I looked at Vivian, who was studying the bookshelves behind me like they were suddenly very interesting. I did not cry. I want to be clear about that. There was no part of my brain in that moment that was available for crying. What I felt instead was something clean and very cold, like the first breath of air inside an operating room. That specific chill that means you are in a controlled environment now, that everything outside this room is irrelevant, that there is only the problem in front of you and the solution you are going to find for it. I let go of the door handle. I turned around, and I walked back down the hall. Jasper followed me without a word. We went all the way to the end of the corridor, past the oil portraits of Carver ancestors who looked like they had opinions about everything, past the guest bathroom with the hand-embroidered towels nobody was allowed to actually use, to a small sitting room at the end of the hall where someone had left a half-empty bottle of bourbon on a side table. Jasper sat down on the settee. I sat across from him. I poured 2 glasses. We sat there for probably 10 minutes without speaking, which is something only people who've been real friends for a long time can do. The bourbon was good. Of course it was. Everything in the Carver house was expensive. And I held it without drinking it for a while, feeling the weight of the glass in my hand. Finally, Jasper said, very quietly, "How long do you think?" "I don't know," I said. "More than tonight?" "Almost certainly more than tonight." He nodded. He put his glass down. He picked it back up. "Okay," he said finally. Not like it was okay. Like he was deciding something. "Yeah," I said. We finished our drinks. Then we went and figured out what to do next. Before I tell you the rest, you need to understand something about who I was when all of this happened. Not because it excuses anything or explains anything, just because context matters. And I was not, at that point in my life, a person who handled emotional catastrophe gracefully. I am Dr. Mara Hendricks. At 32, I was the youngest attending spinal trauma surgeon on record at Caldwell Regional Medical Center, which had been in operation for 87 years and was very particular about its records. That fact was on a plaque in the administrative hallway. I had walked past it every single day for 4 years without really seeing it, which tells you something about how I related to my own accomplishments. My mentor was Dr. Patricia Chen, who had been doing orthopedic trauma surgery for 31 years and had the hands of someone half her age and the patience of someone with none. She once told me during my second year of residency, in the middle of a 7-hour reconstruction surgery at 2 a.m, that I had what she called pathological composure. She said it the way another person might say you have a gift for music or a gift for languages, a thing you are born with that becomes a tool if you're careful and a trap if you're not. She was right on both counts. I rebuilt shattered spines. I repaired crushed joints from highway accidents and construction site disasters, and one memorable case involving a man who had fallen 30 feet into a grain silo. My hands did not shake, not when the monitors screamed, not when the attending asked if I needed a break after hour 9 and I said no, not when the situation went sideways and everyone else in the room got quiet and waiting, and I had to be the one who kept moving. The operating room was the only place in my life where being this way, controlled, compartmentalized, operating from protocol and precision rather than feeling, was not just acceptable, but actively life-saving. People trusted me with their spines, literally, and I earned that trust every single day. The problem is that it's very difficult to be a different person the moment you take off your scrubs. I tried. I went to the farmer's market on Sunday mornings when I wasn't on call. I learned to make decent pasta from scratch. I called my mother every Thursday. I did all the things people do to demonstrate that they are well-rounded human beings with interior lives. But under all of that, I was still the person who, when my engagement ring started feeling tight in the month before the wedding, identified the swelling as a likely response to increased sodium intake and added it to my personal health log rather than asking myself why I might be physically bracing for something. I was not great at warning signs. I was extraordinary at everything else. The pharmaceutical conference in Chicago was in early October, 3 years before the wedding. I was there for a panel on minimally invasive spinal fusion techniques. There were maybe 6 people in that room who were there for the same reason I was. The rest were industry people, device reps, consultants, and various members of the Carver family, because Carver Pharmaceutical Distribution was a major conference sponsor, and the Carvers treated sponsorships as an invitation to occupy every available surface. Elliott Carver was in the 3rd row of the keynote address, which was about surgical robotics and was honestly not very good. He was wearing a charcoal suit that fit the way expensive suits do when they've been properly tailored, and he had a particular kind of ease about him, the ease of someone who has never once in his adult life worried about the bill at the end of a dinner. He leaned over during the Q&A portion when a particularly earnest presenter was explaining, for the 4th time, the concept of haptic feedback and said quietly, You look like you'd rather be literally anywhere else on Earth right now." I had been thinking almost exactly that. "Is it that obvious?" I said, only to someone who feels exactly the same way. He smiled when he said it. Not a flirty smile exactly, more conspiratorial, like we'd been caught at the same thing, like we were the only two honest people in the room. I laughed. Actually laughed, which startled me, because I had not laughed like that, spontaneous, unplanned, without a social reason for it, in longer than I could easily calculate. We had coffee after the keynote and dinner after the coffee, and by the time I was in a cab back to my hotel, I had already decided that I found him genuinely interesting, which was not something I said lightly. Elliott asked about my surgeries with what appeared to be actual curiosity. He asked follow-up questions. He didn't glaze over when I got into specifics, which almost every person I had ever dated had done by minute 4 of any conversation about work. He had no interest in medicine himself. He was the first to say so. What he had was an interest in competence, in people who were exceptional at difficult things. He collected them, I would understand much later. Brilliant surgeon, celebrated architect, award-winning chef. He liked to be adjacent to greatness. He liked to introduce it to other people. What I mistook for admiration was, I think, curation. But I didn't know that then. Then I just knew that he called when he said he would, that he showed up when he said he would, that when my pager went off in the middle of our third dinner together and I had to leave immediately for a trauma case, he just smiled and said, "Go save lives," and meant it, or seemed to mean it, without a trace of resentment. After years of men who treated my career as a personal inconvenience, that felt like something close to a miracle. I said yes to the proposal on a dock at sunset at the Carver family cabin upstate. His grandmother's ring. 3 carats. Flawless. The whole thing. I said yes without hesitation. I said yes to a future I believed I understood. I did not understand it at all. Cynthia Carver was a woman who had never needed to raise her voice in her life because she had perfected the art of communicating displeasure at a frequency that bypassed the ears entirely and went straight to the nervous system. I met her 6 months into the relationship at the family estate, a place with 12 bedrooms, a staff of 4, and more antique furniture than a mid-sized auction house. Dinner was 5 courses. The silverware was older than my parents'. Cynthia sat at the head of the table in a cream Chanel suit and looked at me the way a jeweler examines a stone that has been submitted for authentication. "A surgeon," she said. "How industrious." I recognized the word choice immediately. Industrious, not brilliant, not accomplished. Industrious. The kind of compliment that is also a reminder that you worked for what you have, which in certain rooms means you don't quite belong with people who simply inherited theirs. "Elliott tells me you're with Caldwell Regional," she continued, turning her wine glass slowly by the stem. "Ethan's previous companions came from rather more established backgrounds. The Winfields, the Ashworth family. I imagine you're familiar." I was not familiar. I was from Columbus, Ohio. My father fixed HVAC units. My mother was an elementary school librarian. I had paid off my own medical school loans. "I can't say I am," I said pleasantly. Cynthia smiled the smile of someone who has made her point and is satisfied. Elliott changed the subject. Afterward, driving back to the city, he told me she'd warm up once she got to know me. He said this with total confidence. The confidence of a man who had never once in his life been made to feel like he didn't belong somewhere. He genuinely believed it. That was almost the saddest part. She did not warm up. Not over the 3 years we were together. Not when I presented at a national surgical conference and the program was in all the major medical journals. Not when Elliott told her I'd been featured in a profile in a medical publication. Not ever. She remained perfectly cordial, perfectly cool. Like a room that is always exactly 2 degrees too cold to be comfortable. I told myself it didn't matter. I was marrying Elliott, not his mother. the things we tell ourselves. Jasper called me on a Tuesday night in late spring, about 8 months before the wedding, with that particular pitch in his voice that I had learned over 11 years meant he was either about to tell me something very bad had happened or something very good had happened, and he needed an audience for it. "I met someone," he said. "Tell me everything," I said. I was eating takeout at my kitchen counter and simultaneously reviewing surgical notes on my tablet, which is how I ate most meals, but I put the tablet down for this. I met her at the Pirelli Gallery opening. She's an art consultant. Mara, she's incredible. She's smart and she knows everything about contemporary art, and she has this way of talking about paintings like they're alive, like they have a whole internal life that you're just not seeing. What's her name? Vivian Cross. She went to Yale. Art history. Okay. She's a lot, but in the best way. I should have pressed on the a lot. I didn't. I was happy for him. Jasper had been single for 2 years after a difficult end to a long relationship, and he had that particular loneliness that happens to people who are very good at being emotionally present for others and not very practiced at asking for it themselves. He deserved someone who made him light up. I met Vivian 3 weeks later at a double-date dinner at a French restaurant in Midtown that Elliott had chosen. She arrived in a vintage Dior wrap dress and immediately informed the maître d' that the lighting in the dining room was, quote, completely hostile to the food. The maître d' looked at her for a moment and then walked away without responding, which I thought was the correct response. Over the next 20 minutes, Vivian explained in detail why the restaurant's interior design represented a fundamental misunderstanding of how physical space interacts with appetite, why the bread was acceptable but the butter was the wrong temperature, and why the sommelier's recommendation for the table was technically fine but uninspired. Elliott found this delightful. He laughed at everything she said. He leaned forward in his seat when she talked. He refilled her wine glass twice before he refilled mine once, and I noticed this but filed it in the drawer in my brain, labeled things to examine later, and kept smiling. Afterward, when Elliott had gone to get the car and Jasper had stepped away to take a work call, Vivian turned to me and said, "Your fiancé is remarkable. You're very lucky." "I know," I said. She held eye contact for just a moment too long. Then she smiled. A real smile, actually warm, and said, "Jasper talks about you constantly, you know. It's sweet." I walked home thinking I was being ridiculous, that I was inventing tension where there was none because I was stressed about the wedding and overworked and not sleeping enough, that Vivian was just intense and Elliott was just sociable, and I needed to stop applying trauma surgeon levels of pattern recognition to a dinner where nothing had actually happened. I told myself that story for 8 more months. I did not sleep. I sat in the blue guest bedroom at the end of the second-floor hall, the one with the window seat overlooking the garden, and I watched the sky outside go from black to that particular dark blue that comes just before dawn, and thought, not about my feelings, which were somewhere below the surface doing whatever they needed to do, but about facts. Fact. Elliott had been with Vivian in the library. Not a one-time thing. I knew this with the same certainty that I knew, mid-surgery, when a fracture was more extensive than the initial imaging had suggested. The body knows things before the brain catches up. I'd been knowing this for a while. Fact. The wedding was in 14 hours. Guests were arriving from out of state. The caterer had already delivered $340 worth of floral arrangements to the reception venue. Fact, I had a signed engagement agreement that included a fidelity clause addendum because my attorney, Theodore Baines, had insisted on it and Elliott had signed it without reading it carefully, which should have told me something about how seriously he took contractual obligations. I was making a list in a small notebook I'd found in the nightstand, a Carver Estate notebook, cream paper with a little embossed C in the corner. When Jasper knocked softly and opened the door, he had not slept either. He had his suit jacket off and his tie loosened, and he was carrying 2 mugs of coffee that he'd made himself in the kitchen at whatever ungodly hour. He handed me one and sat in the chair across from the window seat. "How are you doing?" he said. Not a question so much as an opening. "I'm making a list," I said. "Of course you are." He said it without judgment. That's the thing about people who have known you for 11 years. They're not surprised by how you handle things. They already know. We sat for a while. The garden outside was starting to get its shapes back as the sky lightened. There was a bird somewhere. A cardinal, I think, going through its whole morning routine without any apparent concern for the situation on the second floor. "How long do you think it's been?" Jasper said finally. "Long enough that she knows where the library is," I said. He was quiet for a moment. Then, "Yeah." "How long do you think you've known something was wrong?" I asked. He was quiet for longer this time. He turned his mug in both hands, looking at the floor. "Couple months," he said. "Maybe 3. She started being weird about her phone. And there was a weekend she said she was visiting her sister in Portland. But when I mentioned her sister later, the timeline didn't line up." "And you didn't know?" He looked up. I didn't want to be the person who was so insecure that he accused his girlfriend of lying. I didn't want to be that guy. "I understand that completely," I said. He nodded. "Jasper," I said carefully, "I need to tell you something about what I'm going to do today. And I need you to decide if you're with me or if you need some time first. Either answer is okay. I mean that." He looked at me. "What are you going to do today?" "I'm going to end this in a way that makes it impossible to pretend it didn't happen," I said. "And then I'm going to be very, very patient." He picked up his coffee. "I'm with you," he said. "Tell me what we're doing." At 8:15 in the morning, I went downstairs in a cashmere sweater and jeans. I had changed out of yesterday's outfit, and I was not, under any circumstances, going to spend this conversation in a rehearsal dinner dress. And I found the wedding coordinator, a woman named Bethany with a headset and a clipboard and the look of someone who had been managing crises since 6 a.m. in the morning room. "Bethany," I said. She looked up from her clipboard. Whatever she saw in my face made her go very still. "The wedding is not happening today," I said. "I need you to make the calls." She opened her mouth. "I know," I said. "I understand it's an enormous amount of work, and I'm sorry for the situation. You'll be paid in full, all of it. If there are additional costs for cancellations, send them to Theodore Baines at Baines Legal. He's in the Caldwell directory. He's expecting to hear from you." He was not technically expecting to hear from her at 8:15 on a Saturday, but Theodore was the kind of attorney who answered calls on weekends when the situation warranted it. And this situation warranted it. Bethany, to her enormous credit, simply said, "Understood. Do you need anything from me personally?" "Just the calls," I said. I found Cynthia in the formal sitting room off the foyer, which was where she held court in the mornings. She was in a silk robe with her reading glasses on, reviewing what appeared to be the seating chart for the reception. She looked up when I came in and said nothing, which was very Cynthia. She never wasted words on greetings. "I found Elliott and Vivian Cross together last night," I said, "in the library." Her face did not move. "The wedding is canceled," I said. "I'm leaving within the hour. I wanted to tell you directly rather than through Bethany." Cynthia set down the seating chart. She took her reading glasses off. She held them in both hands. "I see," she said, which I understood to be a complete sentence. I turned to go. "Mara," she said. I stopped. But when I looked back, she had nothing further to say. Or she had things to say that she wasn't ready to say. Either way, she just looked at me for a long moment and then turned back to the window, and I left her there. Elliott found me in the entryway getting my bag from the closet. He looked like he hadn't slept, which he hadn't, and he had clearly spent the intervening hours preparing something, because when he started talking, it came out with that particular practiced smoothness of a speech that has been rehearsed. Mara, listen. What you saw was a mistake, and it's not reflective of, it doesn't change what we have, what we've built together. You're the most incredible woman I've ever... Elliott, I said. He stopped. I'm going to need you to stop talking, I said. I took the ring off. I held it out. He didn't take it immediately. I think he genuinely thought I might be bluffing. So I set it on the hall table between us. Then I picked up my bag and I walked out the front door and I got into the car I had called at 7:30 that morning, and I drove away from the Carver estate and the white roses and the 120 guests who were going to arrive that afternoon to a wedding that no longer existed. I did not look back. I want to be honest. It was not as dramatic as it sounds. There was no music. My hands shook slightly when I was getting my bag from the closet. I cried for about 6 minutes somewhere around exit 12 on the highway, and then I stopped. Not because I was done feeling things, but because there was a lot to do, and I needed to be able to see the road. 3 weeks later, I was back at work, and I was, according to Dr. Patricia Chen, operating at approximately 140% of my normal intensity, which she said the way you'd say someone had a fever of 104. Technically impressive, but not sustainable and concerning in ways that might not be immediately visible. I ignored her. I took cases I didn't have to take. I arrived before everyone else and left after everyone else. I was excellent at my job, and I was using it to not think about anything else, which is a strategy with a limited shelf life but a surprisingly high short-term effectiveness rating. The false lead came from a colleague, a hospitalist named Dr. Craig, who knew Elliott through a mutual acquaintance in the pharmaceutical world. Craig had heard about the cancellation, and he approached me one afternoon near the coffee station in the surgeon's lounge with the air of someone delivering important intelligence. I've been hearing things, he said, lowering his voice, about Elliott moving money around ahead of the wedding into a separate account nobody knew about. A financial advisor I know said something about it at a dinner last month. Could be relevant to your situation. My situation. I appreciated the delicacy of that. I called Theodore Baines that afternoon. Theodore was a methodical man who wore brown suits and kept impeccably organized files and had a gift for finding financial irregularities in places other attorneys didn't think to look. I told him what Craig had said. He said he'd look into it. Over the next 3 weeks, Theodore retained a forensic accountant named Gloria, who was very good at her job and also very expensive. Gloria pulled financial records, cross-referenced asset transfers, and followed the paper trail that Craig's contact had described. The account existed. It was real. It had significant money in it. And it was, upon closer examination, a completely legitimate restructuring of a family trust that had been in process for 14 months, initiated before Elliott and I got engaged, and had been disclosed to Carver Pharmaceuticals' board as part of standard fiduciary reporting. There was nothing hidden about it. It was boring and legal and had nothing to do with anything. I had spent nearly $11,000 in legal and accounting fees, chasing a lead that led nowhere. I sat in Theodore's office on a Thursday afternoon and looked at Gloria's report, which was thorough and well-organized and completely useless to me, and I felt something that I can only describe as a deep, structural frustration. Not panic, not defeat, but the kind of cold reset that happens when a surgical plan fails mid-operation and you have to stop, assess, and find another way. "Okay," I said. Theodore looked at me carefully. Okay as in, I need to start over," I said. "The trust is a dead end. What do we actually have?" He opened the second folder. "The fidelity clause in the engagement agreement is still valid. We don't need the financial angle to pursue it. We need documented evidence of the infidelity, something we can present that establishes the timeline and demonstrates a pattern, not just a single incident." "Then let's find a pattern," I said. We started over. Here is something they don't prepare you for in medical school or in residency or in the 12 years of training and early career grinding that make you who you are as a surgeon. The operating room is not a refuge. Not really, not forever. You can use it that way for a while. You can submerge yourself in the precision of it, in the protocols and the checklists and the absolute necessity of being present and focused, and for a while that submersion feels like survival. You emerge from a 10-hour surgery and you are exhausted in a way that leaves no room for anything else, and that absence of room feels like relief. But the body keeps score, and eventually it sends a bill. Mine sent it through my residence, specifically through a third-year resident named Dr. Kamani, who was sharp and careful, and who one afternoon in the scrub room said quietly, without looking at me, "Doctor. Hendricks, can I ask you something?" "Go ahead." "How long has it been since you've eaten a real meal?" I thought about it. I genuinely could not immediately answer. "I'm not trying to overstep," Kamani said, still not looking at me, scrubbing with that particular focused attention. Residents develop when they're saying something they're nervous about saying. But you've been here before all of us and leaving after all of us. And yesterday you snapped at Dr. Odom's team during the post-op review about something that wasn't actually their fault. And I think... He paused. "I think you might be scaring people in a way that isn't productive." I looked at him. "That was a very brave thing to say," I said. "I've been working up to it for 2 weeks," he admitted. I took the afternoon off. I went home. I ate an actual meal. Eggs and toast, not glamorous but hot and made by my own hands. And I sat at my kitchen table for 2 hours without doing anything in particular, just sitting. Just being in a room without a task in front of me, it was profoundly uncomfortable, and also, eventually, slightly better. Dr. Felicia Odom called me into her office the following Monday. Felicia was the kind of administrator who managed to be both genuinely caring and completely direct, which is a rare combination in hospital leadership. She sat across the desk from me and said, "I'm not going to make you talk about your personal life, but I want you to know that what you're doing to yourself is visible, and I need you to find a way to process what happened that doesn't involve slowly dismantling your own health." "I hear you," I said. "Good. Take a week of personal leave." "Felicia?" "Non-negotiable," she said pleasantly. "Use the time however you want. Come back when you can eat lunch." I took the week. I started seeing a therapist named Dr. Miller, which was not something I had done before and which I approached with the same combination of skepticism and determination I brought to learning any new difficult skill. I cleaned my apartment from top to bottom. I called my mother, and I started actually reconstructing the timeline. Let me tell you about the specific kind of satisfaction that comes from finding what you're looking for in a place you almost didn't look. Elliott and I had shared several financial accounts during our engagement. A joint household account for wedding expenses, a shared credit card for travel, and what I had understood to be our complete financial overlap. What I did not know until I logged into the shared travel rewards account, which I still had access to because Elliott had never thought to remove me, was that Elliott had a secondary travel membership attached to the account that I had never used and had barely noticed. That secondary membership had a hotel rewards number. That hotel rewards number had a transaction history. I found it on a Tuesday night at 11:30 p.m., sitting at my kitchen counter with a glass of wine I was not really drinking, clicking through account settings the way you do when you're looking for something to do with your hands. The history went back 14 months. 14 months of hotel check-ins at a boutique hotel downtown that I had never been to with Elliott. Every few weeks, sometimes twice in a week. The dates were specific and real and documented, and they overlapped with dates he had told me he was traveling for work, for family obligations, for pharmaceutical industry events that I had never attended because I was always working or tired or trusting. I sat very still for a moment. Then I started taking screenshots. Methodical, organized, complete. Every transaction, every date, every confirmation number. I saved them to a folder on my laptop labeled with a name I am not going to share because it made me laugh a little, and dark humor was how I was getting through this period. Then I printed everything, 3 copies. Then I saved the screenshots to a flash drive. Then I called Theodore at 7 the next morning, which was early even for him, and I said, I have a documented pattern, 14 months, regular intervals, single occupancy bookings at the same location under his separate rewards number. Theodore was quiet for a moment. Then he said, That's a pattern. That's a very clear pattern, I said. Bring me everything, he said. All of it. Physical copies, digital copies, the whole record. I brought him everything. I handed it to him in a folder at his office that afternoon and watched him review it and watched his expression do the thing attorney expressions do when something is more useful than expected. This is good, he said. This is genuinely good, Mara. I felt something loosen in my chest. Not triumph, not yet, but the specific relief of a person who has been searching for a path through the dark and found a wall to put their hand on. I went home feeling, for the first time in weeks, like I had a solid floor under me. That feeling lasted 4 days. Theodore called me on a Friday evening. I was at the hospital finishing notes from a morning surgery, and when I saw his name on my phone, something in my stomach registered before my brain did that. This was not a routine call. There was a break-in at the office last night, he said. I set down my pen. The filing room was accessed. The lock was bypassed, not forced, which is the strange part. Professional, or someone with some experience. The cabinet with your case folder was opened. The drive is gone. The print copies are gone. Everything you brought me is gone. I was quiet. The rest of the office wasn't touched, Theodore said. Nothing else taken. The petty cash in the front desk was untouched. The computers weren't accessed. It was specifically, deliberately your materials. Have you filed a police report? I said. Yes, this morning. I'm also contacting my building's security company. But Mara... He paused. I want to be transparent with you. I think someone knew what we had and where it was. Someone being. I have no way to prove that. I thought about who knew I had gone to Theodore, who knew about the rewards account evidence. I had told Jasper. I had told no one else. Jasper had not told anyone. I was certain of that, which meant either Theodore's office had been under some kind of surveillance or someone had figured out on their own that I was building a case. Okay, I said. I know that's not what you wanted to hear. No, I said. But here's what I need you to understand. I can rebuild this. The records were in the rewards account. Digital records that still exist in the original system. I can pull them again. What I don't have anymore is the physical documentation you were holding, but I still have access to the source. That's true, Theodore said slowly, but a second pull from the same account, after evidence has already been collected and then stolen, is going to look different in court than an original unbroken chain of custody. I know, I said. So we need to find another way to authenticate it, something independent of what I can pull myself. There was a pause. I could hear Theodore thinking. I'll reach out to a digital forensics contact, he said, someone who can establish an independent verification of the account records and timestamp them in a way that can't be challenged. Good, I said. Do that. I hung up the phone and sat for a moment in the quiet of the empty surgery suite. The lights were on their automatic evening setting, lower, softer. I looked at my hands flat on the desk in front of me, not shaking. Good. I thought about who had taken those files. I thought about who stood to lose most from what was in them. And I thought about the fact that whoever had done it was not very smart, because all they had done was confirm that they knew I was building a case, which confirmed that there was something worth building a case about. They had stolen the evidence. They had not stopped me. Those are not the same thing. Cynthia Carver called me on a Wednesday morning in late September. I almost did not answer. I stared at her name on my screen for approximately 4 rings, constructing and rejecting several responses, and then I picked up because I was, if nothing else, curious. "Mara," she said. "Cynthia?" A pause. The specific pause of a woman who has decided to do something she finds distasteful and is preparing herself for it. "I'd like to meet," she said. "I think you'll find it worth your time." We met at a hotel restaurant downtown, neutral territory which I noted and appreciated. Cynthia was in gray, perfectly put together as always, with the kind of posture that comes from decades of assuming everyone in the room is watching, which, in her case, they usually were. She ordered tea. She did not make small talk. She waited until the server was gone, and then she said, without preamble, "I'm going to tell you something, and I need you to understand that I am doing this for reasons that are not entirely altruistic." "I appreciate the honesty," I said. "Carver Pharmaceutical is in the process of completing a merger with Meridian Health Solutions," she said. "It has been in negotiation for 18 months. It is the largest transaction in the company's history. The Meridian board is conservative, family values oriented in the way that matters to investors and public-facing brands. Elliott's behavior, if it becomes public in a messy, uncontrolled way, if there is, for instance, an ugly lawsuit that generates press coverage, threatens the transaction." "And so you want to help me," I said, "in a way that gives you control over how this becomes public." She looked at me with something that might have been respect. "You're quick," she said. "I've been told." She opened her bag. She set 3 items on the table: a small manila envelope, a folded printout, and a Samsung phone in a gray case. "The phone was in Elliott's car," she said. "I found it 3 weeks ago during a family trip. It is not his primary phone. I have not turned it on since I found it. The envelope contains hotel records I pulled from our family account manager. I had access I had forgotten about. The printout is a forwarded email chain I found on his personal laptop when he left it open at the estate." She paused. "I am not proud of how I obtained these things." "Did you take anything from Theodore Bain's office?" I asked directly. She looked at me steadily. "No," she said. "I did not." I believed her, oddly, the way she'd phrased everything. Methodical, self-aware, no attempt to appear better than she was, had the texture of truth. "What do you want in exchange?" I said. "I want this resolved through legal channels, quietly, with a settlement, not a public trial, not press coverage, a documented fidelity clause violation that results in a structured financial settlement and allows everyone to move forward." She paused, "including Elliott, who I am not defending but who is, despite everything, my son." I looked at the items on the table. I thought about all the things Cynthia had communicated over 3 years through 100 small cruelties and acts of deliberate dismissal. I thought about the frosted glass voice and the word industrious and the seating chart she was reviewing the morning I walked out of her house. "I'll have Theodore contact you," I said. "He'll review what you've brought me. If it supports the case, we proceed as you've described. If at any point the terms change, I reserve the right to change my approach." "Understood," she said. I picked up the envelope and the phone and the printout. I put them in my bag. "Mara," she said as I was gathering my things. I waited. "He was not like this when he was young," she said, and her voice had something in it that I had never heard before, something worn and undefended. Or perhaps he was, and I didn't want to see it. Either way. She picked up her tea. "I'm sorry for how I treated you." I thought about a dozen different responses. Then I said, "I know." And I left. The Caldwell Regional Annual Fundraising Gala was in October, 6 weeks after the canceled wedding, and I had debated not going. I had ultimately decided to go because I had raised money for 3 of the last 5 galas, and I was not going to let Elliott Carver make me invisible in a room I had helped build. He was there. Of course he was. Carver Pharmaceutical was a major donor. Nobody had thought, or perhaps nobody had been willing, to uninvite him. I saw him across the room approximately 40 minutes in, near the bar, talking to a cardiologist I recognized and a device rep I didn't. He saw me at the same time. I watched him make a decision about whether to come over, and I watched him decide yes, and I thought, here we go. He crossed the room with a drink in each hand, which I recognized as a power move. Hands occupied means less tension in the body, makes the approach look casual rather than calculated. He was wearing a navy suit. He looked good. I noticed this the way you notice weather, a factual observation with no particular feeling attached. "Mara," he said. "You look—" "Elliott," I said. He handed me the drink. I did not take it. He set it down on a high-top table nearby. "I've been hoping we'd have a chance to talk," he said. "I think there are some things that have gotten, out of proportion, in the aftermath of a very emotional situation. I just think if we could sit down, the two of us, without lawyers involved, we could probably—" "Elliott," I said again. He stopped. "I'm going to stop you right there because I want to be clear about something," I said. "I am here for the gala. I raised $42,000 in donations for the Pediatric Orthopedics program, and I intend to spend this evening acknowledging the people who contributed to that. I am not here to talk to you. I am not going to sit down with you without my attorney present. And whatever you're about to say about proportion and emotions, I need you to hear me when I tell you that what I'm doing is not emotional. It is extremely deliberate." He stared at me. "Have a good evening," I said. And I turned and walked straight across the room to Dr. Felicia Odom, who was standing with 3 board members near the stage, and I joined that conversation, and I did not look back once for the rest of the night. Jasper, who had come with me, met me near the coat check at the end of the evening. "How'd it go?" he said. "He tried to talk me out of the lawsuit," I said. "Told me things were out of proportion." Jasper made a sound in his throat. "I know," I said. "You okay?" I thought about it honestly. "Yeah," I said. "Actually, yeah." The case Theodore built over the following 6 weeks was, in his words, clear and well supported. In my words, it was the most organized I had ever seen outside of a surgical plan, which made me like Theodore considerably more than I had before. Cynthia's materials were real and usable. The phone contained a text message history that was damaging in its specificity. Dates, times, locations, and a particular category of communication that left no room for alternate interpretations. The hotel records from the family account manager cross-referenced precisely with the transaction history I had already found in the rewards account. The forwarded email chain documented a booking at the same downtown hotel made 5 months before the wedding under Elliott's personal account. Theodore's digital forensics contact, a woman named Iris who worked out of a firm in the financial district and who had the calm, methodical energy of someone who had seen every variety of financial and electronic misdeed and was no longer surprised by any of it, independently verified and time-stamped the rewards account records, establishing their provenance in a way that could not be challenged on chain of custody grounds. The fidelity clause in the engagement agreement was specific and enforceable. It had been drafted by Theodore himself, which meant he understood exactly where the edges were and exactly how to make the case that those edges had been crossed, repeatedly, over a 14-month period. "We have a solid case for breach of contract," Theodore told me over the phone one evening while I was making dinner. "The clause specifies financial damages which we can calculate. There's also the question of the assets you contributed to shared accounts and joint expenses during the engagement period. Furniture purchases, the venue deposit, the honeymoon deposits that you paid for." "What's the total?" He named a number. I set down my spatula. "That's before legal fees," he added. "What's the ask?" "Full restitution plus fees, and I want an indemnity clause. Something that protects you from him coming back at you later with some counterclaim about shared property." "Will he settle?" Theodore paused. "I think his mother will convince him to. She's been cooperative from what I can tell. She wants this quiet." "Then let's send the demand letter," I said. He sent it the following Thursday morning. By Friday afternoon, Elliott's attorney had called to discuss terms. Jasper, to his credit, handled the Vivian situation with more composure than I would have managed. He had known since the night of the library that he was going to have to deal with it directly. He was just taking the time to be ready to deal with it in a way that didn't leave him in pieces on the floor. He went to see her in early October. He told me about it afterward over the phone, his voice steady in the careful way of someone who has decided in advance to stay in control of their emotions. He'd asked her directly. He said he told her he knew what had happened. He said he wasn't there to yell. He just wanted to know the truth. And? She told him it was once, Jasper said, that it was a mistake, that it was just physical. I let the silence sit for a moment. Just physical, I said. Exactly those words. We were both quiet. She probably rehearsed it, Jasper said. She probably figured that if she minimized it and framed it as impulsive, he'd have a harder time staying angry. Smaller target, less impact. Did it work? I asked. No, he said. Because the same week, a mutual friend who works at the Pirelli Gallery, where Vivienne has her big solo show coming up, let something slip. They said Vivienne had been mentioning Elliott at work for months. Not by name, just someone I've been seeing. Apparently, half the gallery staff knew she was involved with someone other than Jasper for at least 8 months. I thought about the rehearsal dinner toast he had spent 2 weeks drafting. I thought about the double date, the wine glasses, the way Vivienne had looked at Elliott across the table and then turned to me and said, "You're very lucky." "Jasper," I said. "I know," he said. "I'm sorry." "Me too." A pause. "But I'm okay. I'm going to be okay." "I know you are." "What I want to know," he said, his voice changing slightly into something quieter and more determined, "is what you need from me, for the legal thing, whatever you need." "I might need a statement," I said, "about the timeline from your perspective." "What you observed at the library. Theodore says it could be useful for corroborating the pattern." "Done," Jasper said. "Tell Theodore to send the form." Vivienne's solo exhibition at the Pirelli Gallery was called Interior Distances, which was either very meaningful or entirely made up. I genuinely could not tell. It had been in the works for 2 years. She had told anyone who would listen, and it was supposed to represent her full arrival as a serious, curatorial voice in the contemporary art world. She had sent invitations to a long list of wealthy clients. Several of them were people who had attended our almost wedding. Theodore hand-delivered the legal notice at 5:30 in the afternoon on the opening night. He did not do this to be cruel. He did it because that was when his process server was available and because the papers needed to be served before a specific filing deadline. The timing was a coincidence. I want to be honest. I was aware of the timing. I did not ask Theodore to change it. The notice named Vivienne Cross as a material third party in a breach of contract action and requested her participation in the deposition process. It was formal. It was legal. It was exactly the kind of document that, when delivered by a process server to an art gallery 45 minutes before an opening, creates a very specific kind of atmosphere. I was not there. I heard about it the following morning from a woman named Diane, who had been one of Elliott's college friends and had therefore been invited to both the almost wedding and the gallery show, and who called me because she had been at the gallery and felt I should hear it from someone I knew. "She went completely white," Diane said, "and she tried to keep it together, she really did. But some of her clients had already arrived, and you could just see. The thing about an art show is there's nowhere to go, you know? You can't leave your own opening. So she just had to stand there and smile and make conversation, and everyone could see that something had happened and nobody knew what to say." "How did it end?" I asked. "I think she told people it was a misunderstanding, but—" Diane paused. "2 of her clients left early, and Marla Fontaine. You know Marla, she was at your rehearsal dinner. She gave me this look when she left and said she wasn't sure this was a good time to be expanding her collection." I thought about that. "How did the paintings look?" I asked. Diane was quiet for a moment. "Actually, pretty good," she admitted. "But that almost made it worse, you know. like you wanted to just look at the art, but then there was all this other thing happening. Yeah, I said. I can imagine. The call came from a blocked number 11 days after the demand letter was sent, and 2 days after Vivienne's deposition notice was served. I had been half expecting it. I answered. "This is incredibly vindictive," Elliott said. He had forgone the practiced, reasonable tone entirely. This was unedited Elliott, the version that existed behind the conferences and the suit and the smile, and it was actually more interesting than the performance. "You're doing this to embarrass me, to punish me. This is Mara. This is not who you are." I had set my phone to record the moment I saw it was a block number, which is a thing Theodore had told me to do in exactly this situation. I sat down on my couch and let Elliott talk. "The merger is the most important thing my family has built in 3 generations, and you are doing this deliberately to create noise around it. You know that's what this is. You know you're using the legal system as a weapon because you are angry and you want me to suffer, and I understand that. I do. But there has to be a limit to—" "Elliott," I said. He stopped. "I want you to know that this call is being recorded," I said. A long silence. "You just offered, in the previous 90 seconds, to— I believe the phrase you used was, 'make this right,' which I want on record as an acknowledgement that there is something to make right," I said. "Thank you for that." "Mara." "Theodore will receive this recording in the morning," I said. "If you want to discuss settlement terms, have your attorney call his. Have a good night, Elliott." I hung up. I sat with the phone in my hands for a moment. The apartment was quiet. The city outside my window was doing its evening thing. Lights coming on, traffic thinning out, that particular shift in the ambient sound of a city settling into night. I felt something I hadn't felt since before the library. Not happiness exactly, more like alignment. Like I was standing exactly where I was supposed to be standing, and my feet were steady under me. Theodore filed the recording with the court the next morning, as promised. By noon, Elliott's attorney had called with a revised settlement offer. By Thursday, we had a number. It was the right number. 3 months later, I was in Zurich. The fellowship at University Hospital Zurich, the one I had declined the previous year because Elliott and I were planning a wedding, and I had told myself I could defer my career for 12 months without consequence, had been offered again through a colleague who knew my work and believed in it enough to hold the spot. I accepted it the week the settlement cleared. The settlement cleared for an amount that covered every expense I had contributed to our shared life since the engagement began, plus legal fees, plus what Theodore referred to as associated damages, which was the polite legal term for what I referred to, privately, as compensation for the wedding I spent 3 months planning that Elliott spent 3 months not taking seriously. I did not feel triumphant. I want to be honest about that. Triumph would have required believing that the outcome I got was equivalent to the outcome I had wanted, and I had wanted to marry someone who loved me the way they said they did, and no settlement amount makes those things the same. What I felt was clean, settled, like a file that had been correctly closed and properly archived. I'd started seeing Dr. Muller twice a week before I left for Zurich. He was a quiet Swiss therapist with a calm office and no opinion about anything except the therapeutic value of sitting with difficult feelings rather than cutting around them, which was a concept I was finding both deeply challenging and genuinely useful. I continued the sessions over video call from my apartment in Zurich, which was small and well lit and had a view of a canal that I found inexplicably comforting. I was learning things, not comfortable things. I was learning that control is not the same as safety. That being exceptional at a job that requires precision does not mean precision is always the right approach to a life. That the thing I had called compartmentalization and which Dr. Miller called avoidance had served me very well in operating rooms and very poorly in relationships, and that at some point I was going to have to figure out how to be excellent and also present, capable, and also vulnerable. Sure of my hands and genuinely uncertain about what came next, I was working on it, slowly, which was a pace I was not accustomed to but was learning to tolerate. Jasper texted me in late November. "Coming to visit, book me a couch." He arrived on a gray Saturday with a duffel bag and a bottle of good wine, and the particular ease of someone who has been your friend long enough that you don't have to explain anything. You just make coffee and let the conversation find its own way. We sat on the small balcony of my apartment watching the canal and the lights of the city, both of us on our second glass, and Jasper told me about Rosalind. "She's a public defender," he said. "Brilliant. I mean, genuinely brilliant. She called me on something in our second week of dating that nobody had ever called me on before, and I was so startled I almost dropped my phone." "What did she call you on?" "She said I have a habit of assuming I understand what other people are feeling without asking them," he said. "Which is true. It's the most annoying kind of accurate." "I like her already," I said. "We're going incredibly slowly," he said. "I'm terrified of missing things, of being so convinced that someone is wonderful that I don't see what's actually there." "That makes sense," I said. He looked at me. "What about you?" "Not ready yet," I said. "Not for a while. Right now, I'm just working on figuring out who I am when I'm not running from something." "Is it working?" I thought about it. The canal below caught the light from a passing boat and broke it into small, moving pieces. "It's clarifying," I said. "It's uncomfortable, but I think that's what clarifying feels like." Jasper raised his glass. "To clarity," he said. I raised mine. "And to very slow progress," I said. We drank. Vivian had lost 2 major clients in the weeks following the gallery opening, Jasper told me. The gallery itself had reduced her wall space for the following season. She had moved to a smaller apartment. Jasper said this without satisfaction, just even-handedly, the way you report facts that are neither good nor bad, but simply what happened. Elliott was in therapy. Cynthia had made it a condition of continued access to family resources. Jasper's opinion, delivered with the professional skepticism of a man who had spent a decade watching people perform compliance without changing, was that Elliott was doing the minimum necessary to stop the pressure. My opinion was the same, but that was Elliott's problem now, not mine. I had started dating again, very tentatively, in the way of someone who has decided to learn a skill they are not naturally gifted at, with attention, patience, and a willingness to admit when something isn't working. I had one good first date, one terrible second date, and one genuinely interesting third date with a structural engineer named Vera, who asked better questions than most people I'd met in my professional life, and who had not yet, after 2 months, given me a single reason to be concerned. I took that seriously. I did not get ahead of it. I paid attention. It turned out paying attention was something I was, when I actually applied myself to it, rather good at. I was still the best spinal trauma surgeon in my fellowship cohort. I was still the person who stayed steady when everything else was moving. I was still precise, still determined, still someone who believed that most problems had solutions if you were willing to be systematic and patient about finding them. But I was also slowly becoming someone who could sit with a glass of wine on a balcony in Zurich and not need to be doing something else. Someone who could let a canal be a canal, and let a friend's company be enough, and let the future be something she didn't need to manage. Just move through. It was the hardest work I'd ever done, and I was not finished yet. But I was, for the first time in as long as I could remember, genuinely curious about what came next. That was enough. For now, that was more than enough. If this story resonated with you, leave a like and consider subscribing. You can also drop any comment below, even just one word. Maybe tell me where you're watching from, or what time it is right now. Sometimes one word is enough to say you were here.